roads that matter. They are recognized as significant only in retrospect, only when you turn around and look at the distance covered and realize that what felt like individual steps was actually something continuous and cumulative and building toward a number that now sits in the record books with the permanence of carved stone. 300 career home runs. For Shohei Ohtani, that number is not simply a statistic. It is a geography. A landscape of moments stretched across two cities, two teams, two versions of a career that most people still struggle to hold in their minds as a single coherent thing. Because the road from the first home run to the 300th is not a straight line. It bends. It climbs. It passes through moments of doubt and injury and reinvention and the particular loneliness of being something the sport has no existing language for. It passes through Anaheim. Through the specific, sun-drenched reality of a young man from Iwate Prefecture standing in an American batter's box for the first time and doing something that announced, quietly and then loudly, that the map of what was possible in this sport needed to be redrawn. And it passes through Los Angeles. Through the beginning of a new chapter that carried the weight of everything that came before it and added something the previous chapter hadn't contained. The road to 300 is not just a collection of home runs. It is the story of a person becoming something the sport had never seen. And it starts, like all roads start, at the beginning. Anaheim received him before it fully understood him. That was inevitable. Because understanding Ohtani requires time and evidence and a willingness to revise your expectations repeatedly as he exceeds each previous revision. When he arrived in 2018, the conversation was dominated by the concept rather than the reality. A two-way player. A pitcher and a hitter at the major league level simultaneously. The idea had been discussed and debated before his arrival with the kind of intensity that ideas receive when they challenge something the sport considers settled. Baseball had decided, decades earlier, that the two-way player was a romantic notion from a previous era. That the game had evolved beyond it. That specialization was not a choice but a necessity imposed by the complexity and depth of modern pitching and modern hitting. Ohtani arrived and began the quiet work of proving that decision premature. His first home run came on April 3, 2018. Against the Oakland Athletics. A fastball from Daniel Gossett that Ohtani met with the full force of a swing that was already, in its very first major league expression, something worth stopping to examine. The ball traveled 389 feet. The number is precise. The feeling it created was less precise and more lasting. It was the feeling of something beginning. Of a first word in a language that would take years to fully speak. In the Angels' dugout, teammates reacted with the enthusiasm of people witnessing something they'd been told was coming but hadn't quite believed until it arrived. In the press box, journalists wrote the first sentences of a story they would spend years continuing. And Ohtani, rounding the bases in Anaheim for the first time, wore the expression he still wears today. Focused. Present. Already thinking about the next thing. The Angels' years were complicated in the way that extraordinary individual performance inside a struggling team context is always complicated. Ohtani produced. Consistently, remarkably, in ways that generated highlight reels and award consideration and the growing recognition that what he was doing had no real precedent. But the team around him could not convert individual excellence into collective success. And the injuries arrived. The Tommy John surgery in 2018 that removed pitching from his arsenal for a full season and forced a recalibration of what his career would look like in the immediate term. The subsequent recoveries and setbacks and returns that tested the patience of everyone invested in watching him reach his potential. Through all of it, the home runs accumulated. Not always in clusters. Not always with fanfare. Sometimes quietly, in April games that didn't matter to the standings. Sometimes dramatically, in moments that briefly made everyone believe the Angels were capable of something more than they ultimately were. Each one added to the count. Moved the number forward. Built the foundation of what 300 would eventually stand on. There were home runs that showcased pure power, balls hit so hard and so far that the physics felt excessive. There were home runs that showcased precision, inside pitches turned on with a quickness that made pitchers shake their heads in the dugout. There were home runs against elite pitchers who had prepared for him and executed their plan and watched it fail anyway. There were home runs in late innings with the game on the line. There were home runs in the first at-bat of a game, before the coffee had finished brewing in the press box. All of them counted equally. All of them mattered to the road. The departure from Anaheim carried its own weight. Years accumulate, meaning the way home runs accumulate into milestones. The city had held his early career. Had been the place where the experiment became a reality. Where the two-way player stopped being a concept and became a person with a face and a name and a swing that people drove to the stadium specifically to watch. Leaving was not simple. But the next chapter was waiting. And the first home run as a Dodger arrived with a symbolic weight that all first home runs carry, amplified by the magnitude of the transition it represented. Dodger Stadium. The blue uniform. A new city watching with the particular intensity of a fanbase that had been promised something extraordinary and was waiting to see it confirmed. The first pitch he hit out as a Dodger traveled differently somehow. Not physically. The physics were the same. But the meaning attached to the flight of that ball was different from anything that had come before. It was a beginning inside a beginning. A new first in a career already full of them. The stadium received it the way Dodger Stadium receives things it considers its own. Completely. Loudly. With the full force of a crowd that had decided, before the ball even landed, that Shohei Ohtani belonged to them now. What the Dodgers chapter added to the road was context. The Angels' years had proven what Ohtani could do individually. The Dodgers' years began proving what he could do as part of something larger. Surrounded by a roster constructed to compete at the highest level, with teammates who brought their own excellence to the equation, Ohtani's individual brilliance found a new frame. The home runs continued. But they accumulated now inside wins that meant something. Inside a pennant race. Inside postseason conversations. Inside the specific pressure of a team that expects to be playing in October and organizes its entire season around that expectation. The road to 300, in its Dodger Blues section, was steeper in some ways. More scrutinized. Every at-bat carrying the weight of a contract and an expectation and a city's hope. And Ohtani walked that steeper section with the same composure he had walked every previous section. One at-bat at a time. One home run at a time. Moving the number forward without making the number the point. 300 arrived in back-to-back games. Which is entirely appropriate for a road this particular. Because the milestone didn't wait for a ceremony. Didn't pause for the narrative to catch up. It simply appeared, the way all of Ohtani's most significant moments appear, on schedule with his own internal calendar rather than anyone else's expectations. And standing at 300, looking back at the road, what emerges is not a highlight reel. Highlight reels flatten things into their most spectacular moments and lose everything in between. What emerges instead is something more honest and more complete. A young man arriving in Anaheim with a concept that the sport wasn't sure it believed in. The early home runs that proved the concept real. The injuries that tested whether the road would continue. The recoveries that confirmed it would. The accumulation of years and at-bats and pitchers faced and adjustments made and lessons learned and applied. The arrival in Los Angeles. The new beginning inside the larger journey. And finally, 300. Not a destination. A landmark on a road that is still being built. Mile by mile. Home run by home run. In the specific, unhurried, inexorable way that Shohei Ohtani builds everything. Which is to lose everything in between. What emerges instead is something more honest and more complete. A young man arriving in Anaheim with a concept that the sport wasn't sure it believed in. The early home runs that proved the concept real. The injuries that tested whether the road would continue. The recoveries that confirmed it would. The accumulation of years and at-bats and pitchers faced and adjustments made and lessons learned and applied. The arrival in Los Angeles. The new beginning inside the larger journey. And finally, 300. Not a destination. A landmark on a road that is still being built. Mile by mile. Home run by home run. In the specific, unhurried, inexorable way that Shohei Ohtani builds everything. Which is to